Washington, D.C. Up next, we have FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, who sincerely believes in connecting the disconnected. She works to promote greater opportunity, accessibility, and affordability. She has been a champion for net neutrality. She actually helped coin the phrase the homework gap, and she has made the homework gap a nationwide priority by making sure that she's elevating it in the most unlikely places. She's been a thought leader on spectrum policy. She's helped develop new ways to support wireless services, from Wi-Fi to video and Wi-Fi video and Internet of Things. Please welcome Hartford, Connecticut native and NYU alum, Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. Oh, I'm sorry. I totally forgot. We are doing the Q&A. You're going up here. So I totally forgot we did. That was totally my bad.
That's an amazing job. It's a long day.
So it is actually true, because we have, and I actually walked over and already dropped off just the prep sheets, but we have NCC members who are going to get the opportunity to actually question Commissioner Rosenworcel. And so coming up, we have first Ms. Aldona Valicenti, who you've already heard from, and then someone you'll hear from later and hear from now is Mr. Bruce Patterson, who is here from Ammon, Idaho, and I'm really excited to get to have you. Please feel free to join the stage. I'm really excited that we actually get to have local leaders asking our federal policymakers questions about what matters to their communities.
First of all, I'm excited to be here and to ask you a question. I went back and I looked you up on Google. And I read all the articles. So you guys are in for a treat.
Oh, now I'm scared. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the first question. When we see broadband access framed as a rural versus urban issue, can you share what you've been in the grounds of what you've discussed and think about?
Well, thank you for starting off with such a big and important question. It's also terrific to be here with real local leaders on these issues. It's a really special thing in Washington to talk to people who are not just talking about it, but really doing it. So thank you. I believe the future belongs to the connected. No matter who you are or where you live, you're going to need access to modern communications to have a fair shot at 21st century success. I believe that truly, madly, deeply, with every fiber of my being. So we've got to figure out how to make broadband opportunity available to all. And the truth is, in this country, we have problems in both urban and rural America. This is a problem that unites us. It doesn't divide us. And we're going to need a common set of solutions to solve it. And a lot of times in Washington, we talk about rural America and its lack of deployment. But we've got areas in urban America where adoption is remarkably low. And I know from my travels as an FCC commissioner, when you meet a kid in rural New Mexico who can't do their homework at night because there is no broadband or internet access at home, they have the same challenges that a kid does in urban Cleveland who is struggling at home to do their schoolwork at night because they also don't have internet access. So we're going to have to figure out solutions for all of us, and I think we have to start looking at this as a problem that involves all of us and doesn't divide us into our rural and urban quarters.
That's a nice comment. I know in Ammon we would agree with that. We feel like broadband's tied to success. In fact, we often feel like the most precious natural resource we continue to export are our young people, because we find they're leaving and going to large metro areas where they can work from anywhere. But a key part of that is infrastructure. So I'm interested in knowing, what do you see as the best path forward to get the infrastructure we need, not just for basic service, but for the things that we see on the horizon like 5G?
Yeah. Well, how much time do you have? Let's start. You can't manage problems that you do not measure. We've got to figure out in every community where we have broadband and wireless service and where we do not. And by the way, I don't think that's just a federal task. I think the best efforts to try to map where we have broadband and where we do not happen at the local level. And when we figure out where our problems are, we come up with the right solutions. And we're going to need solutions that involve both the ground and the skies. We're going to have spectrum policy that pushes out airwaves that propagate far enough that they're viable in rural communities Right now, for instance, I think the FCC is overly focused on millimeter waveband spectrum whose propagation characteristics are limited. In addition, we're going to have to think about making sure that our skies are free for more Wi-Fi and unlicensed services, because that democratizes internet access and we need more of it. And then when it comes to the ground, we're going to have to come up with dig once policies that make it easier to deploy fiber facilities that future-proof our networks. And we should also start thinking about what a national model code would look like for the deployment of small cells and 5G infrastructure, and then incentivize communities everywhere to use that national standard and harmonize it in a way that looks more like carrots rather than sticks.
One of the questions here, and it's one that I think that you've addressed, at least for what I've read, is really you were one of the first to focus on homework. And I think that that's not only probably close to your heart and to your issues, but is across the United States. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. You know, everyone in this room can talk about broadband, what our standards should be, or 5G. But the truth is, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we care about this policy, if we fail to make it human. And so when I started traveling around the country in this job, the most common denominator I saw was kids need the internet to do their schoolwork. I don't care if you're in rural America or urban America, you need access to the internet to do your schoolwork. You're in red state America, purple America, blue America, you need access to the internet to do your schoolwork. I mean, that wasn't true when I was growing up. I needed paper, a pencil, and my brother leaving me alone. And you know that third one was, of course, the hardest. But today, 7 in 10 teachers assign homework that requires internet access. But all the FCC data repeatedly show 1 in 3 households do not subscribe. So where those numbers overlap is a homework gap. And the Joint Economic Committee in the United States Senate has found 12 million kids fall into that homework gap. And I'm just going to submit to you right now, in 2020, we should do better than that. In the United States of America, every child should be able to do their homework. And if we can solve that problem, I think we're going to be well on our way towards solving the digital divide.
I think we'd agree. So, you know, we heard some earlier about data, mapping in particular. You know, we're starting to think more about that. And we know that that's important to you because you've actually started a campaign to try and collect that data through an email campaign. So maybe you could share with us a little bit more information from your perspective. Why do you feel like it's so important, and what do you feel like is next for the FCC when it comes to trying to collect this data?
Yeah. Well, the FCC's broadband data right now is just not good enough. Not by a large margin. We got to do better. And a few things occurred to me about that. First, so many people were writing me at the agency. They'd tell me their address and that they didn't get service and they didn't understand why. And you want to figure out a way to aggregate all that energy. So a few years ago, I said, okay, we should be crowdsourcing some of this. Every one of us knows where service is and is not. I go back and I visit my family in New England. I can tell you with almost pinpoint clarity what part of Route 30 driving up the road to Vermont we start to lose wireless service. If I know that, there are lots of people who know that. What if we aggregated all that information? So I kept on pressing the agency to do so, and my ideas at the time were falling on deaf ears, so I decided I would just try to start another email address. And it's definitely the last email address they'll let me get at the agency, but I started one that said broadbandfail@fcc.gov. And I introduced it in a Senate Commerce Committee hearing that Senator Hassan held in rural New Hampshire. I said, here, I'm just going to set this up. If I can't come up with a statistically accurate way to crowdsource this information, I'm just going to invite you all to write in. And we got all of these emails from people who wanted to describe to us just how they were being passed by and the concerns they had for their community, their kids, and their future. And to me, this was just evidence that we needed to do better with broadband. We needed to have a better map, and we needed to make sure whatever map we developed included some form of crowdsourcing and a challenge process. And I'm proud at this point that there is legislation like that in both the House and the Senate that's totally bipartisan and recognizes the power of individuals to help. Because the best broadband map isn't going to be made by Washington. It's going to be made by all of us.
Great. I think that everybody in this audience is probably with you on that. You were one of the first FCC commissioners to start talking about 5G. Long before, I think, now that many of us are talking about it all the time. What do you think went right, and what do you think needs further work?
That's a good question. We are deep in the 5G hype cycle, is the way I put it right now. You read lots and lots and lots about it, and yet it still feels out of reach for most of us at the moment with a wireless phone. I think that despite that all, widespread deployment of 5G is going to be extraordinarily powerful for our economy, our communities, and our ability to be efficient with scarce resources. Because the least interesting thing about 5G is going to be your wireless phone. That's no longer going to be the center. We're going to have sensors on so much we do. We'll understand equipment before it breaks. We'll know about our health before we have a crisis. We'll figure out how to make our traffic signals more adaptive, and our world will become a little more efficient all around us in ways that I think are going to be incredibly novel and incredibly exciting. And so I have a lot of confidence in American know-how and innovation to get us there. I think some of the technology we're working on in beamforming with antennas and with spectrum auction design, like in the 3.5 gigahertz band, suggests that we have a whole bunch of interesting ideas we're going to force onto the landscape. And I'm very excited about that innovation. With respect to what I think we need to do better, it really comes down to one major thing, and that's mid-band spectrum. Mid-band spectrum is absolutely vital for 5G service because it has a mix of capacity and propagation. And those are the airwaves that are going to allow us to get 5G deployed everywhere. And I'm worried right now that the United States has held its first 5 auctions in the 5G era with only high band and millimeter wave spectrum, which economically is easier to deploy in cities than in rural communities. And so I think if we're not careful, we could wind up with spectrum policy that takes our digital divide and makes it into a digital chasm with 5G. And so we got to really revisit our spectrum strategy from front to back so that we push out more mid-band spectrum, do it faster, and make sure more 5G is likely to be available to more communities more rapidly.
Well, it is exciting. I think we all agree with you to see the potential,
Yeah.
but it is so important that the policy aligns with the technology and supports it in a way that gets it out there. So we appreciate your work in that regard. You know, a lot of times we focus on things we can see we need to improve. Sometimes that leaves us feeling a little overwhelmed. So maybe to finish, we could finish on a positive. What
I
good
like
do you
optimism.
see? Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, I'm all for that.
So what good do you see coming out of your work and the work of the FCC in the year ahead?
You know, here's what makes me optimistic but a little impatient. It's that I think we're talking about all the right things. I think there's a lot of agreement that we need broadband everywhere, and communities won't have a shot without this infrastructure. I think there's a lot of agreement that we've got to make sure 5G just doesn't get deployed to our urban centers, but we also reach rural America. I think when we talk about the homework gap, we're talking about making sure every child is prepared for a digital future. These are all the right things to be talking about. Closer in these dialogues to developing solutions, because I think we've coalesced around the problems we really need to solve. And I think that means we're midway there. And I've got some hope that we can speed it up and get to solutions faster. But I don't think it's all going to come from Washington. I think it's going to come from communities like yours, because I think there are a lot of good ideas and good things happening in a lot of places in this country, and we got to figure out how to share those good ideas in fora like this. We need to do that more often and more regularly, because if it's a good idea, I think we should be copying it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments very much.